I see that we're going to start out tonight with a presentation, the Annual Student Achievement Report.
Yes, Dr. Ogden.
Okay, and the rest of the props. Thank you. Good evening. I think this is the 26th or 27th one of these I've done. Wow. But it is a requirement, and I think, why do I have? The annual assessment report, some of which, particularly in terms of the state tests, is required that be presented in public session each year, and try and add a few other things in that you might be interested in. Okay, starting with PARCC. This was the third year beyond the first year was a pilot, but the third regular year. And you can see, just looking across the grades, our students are doing well, and they are doing much better than they were that very first year, with few exceptions. I draw your attention to grades 10 and 11, which don't count at all, because so few students at those grades take the tests, because they've already met the graduation requirements. This is the comparison across the grades, looking at the past 3 years for special education students in the district.
Dr. Ogden, before you move along, how early can a student actually satisfy the requirements? You're saying that a lot of our 10th and 11th graders have already
Most satisfy the math requirement in 8th grade. Some in 7th grade, about
And that's
100
the
in
Algebra
7th
1.
grade, Algebra 1. And then at the moment, it's the 9th grade language arts test. So for most of our students, they've met the graduation requirements before they move on to high school.
And Dr. Ogden, I also just wanted to ask, so the first slide, which was all students, includes the special ed?
Included the
Okay,
special
included
education
special ed.
students.
Thank you.
And moving on to mathematics, our students do well in math. I'll speak more about that later on, particularly in geometry and PARCC. Kind of an amazing. And they do better in Algebra 2 than they do in Algebra 1. I'll comment on that in a minute. And again, our special education students, in most cases, they have improved in the last year, particularly over the first year, in which the scores were very low. And there's a small group of special education students. These are the 1 to 1.5%, in this case, district-wide, so 34 students who take an alternative computerized test called the DLM, Dynamic Learning Maps. And these are the results for those students. One of the things we have to report is achievement by school. And you can see all our schools are doing well. There are some variations among schools, and a lot of that is also in the demographics of the schools. Some of the schools have fairly large non-English speaking students groups. Some have many more special education students than others. our two winners, if that's the thing, and it's not by much, each year are Frost and Warnsdorfer. In mathematics, Warnsdorfer won by 2 points this year. But in language arts, it was reversed, with Frost being the 2 points higher. These differences among the schools are really irrelevant.
Yeah,
Statistically
I was going to ask, the English language arts percentages for each school, there seems to be a lot less,
variation.
thank you, variation than the math scores for the different elementary schools. Is there anything you can put your finger on?
No, not
Okay.
particularly, except that you have, you'd think non-English speaking students would weigh the other way. That there's
Yeah,
no-
that
but that doesn't seem to happen. And language arts in general are higher.
Is this telling us anything about work we need to do in terms of remedial or extra help in math in the elementary schools?
No, these are very high
To bring it more
scores.
consistent?
Probably not. I mean, we're always working on it. Some of it's the function of the test. It's like language arts. They do better than they do in math. In most cases, you'll see where there's difference in that. But we're constantly working in all the schools, and particularly any ones that show lower. And the schools do a terrific amount of analysis, not on these total scores, but on the breakdowns. One of the things PARCC does is give very good diagnostic information about where strengths and weaknesses are, all the way down to the individual student. So they look at it in terms of, are there certain things within a particular grade that affects maybe the whole grade, which might be a curriculum issue or the way instruction is delivered. But then it goes all the way down to individual students and patterns of students.
So, Dr. Ogden, just please remind me, it's been a while, in elementary school in math, do we have, do we still have basic skills
Yes.
classes or remedial, or
Yes.
is it a pull-out? Is it a pull-out? Is it in class?
It's a combination. It's mostly push-in,
Okay,
where the basic skills, math, and that's true in language arts, goes into the classroom and works with that group within the classroom.
okay.
One of the focuses this information points to is where the instructional coaches will help support teachers in the school.
Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. And Hammarskjold, in math, in sixth grade, there was a dip this year. We're not quite sure why. They spent a lot of time working on that program. And at seventh grade, that doesn't really show anything because there are just about 100 students in seventh grade that are in honors algebra. So they're not included in the seventh grade
Okay.
scores. So if you added them in, it would be much higher and in line with the language arts scores. And this is true, then you get to Churchill, and you get to the Algebra 1. And this is one that there's been a tremendous amount of work. We have tried everything. Double periods,
That's a mess.
double teachers. And we're convinced, and I'll show you on the next slide, that a lot of this is not the Algebra 1 program, it's the PARCC test in algebra. And I'll show you how we come to that conclusion. And you
I just
also
have
see...
a question before we move on.
Yes, sure.
On all of the other charts that we have, we are showing the proficiency levels of 4 and 5, but at Churchill for the mathematics, I suppose it's also for the English language as well.
No, it's just in the mathematics.
Oh, it's just in the math, but anyway, you're showing proficiency levels at 3, 4, and 5. And we're
Right.
doing that because it would be even worse?
No, that's the way PARCC says, that passing in geometry and algebra 2 is a 3, 4, or 5.
So those are the state
And in
standards?
algebra 1, it's a 4 or 5.
Okay.
And
The high school.
And East Brunswick High School, as I say, really doesn't count. We had like 150 students take the
I was going to say,
language
this has
arts.
to be due to the number of kids who
Yeah.
opt out.
And we had an action plan, because one thing I hadn't mentioned, 10 of our schools, they all met the 95% participation rate this year,
Right.
which is the state standard. And we had to have a action plan in terms of, at that time, it was Churchill and the high school. And we just put in the action plan that we were going to notify parents whether or not their child had met the graduation standards or not. And if they hadn't, better take PARCC.
Yeah, because.
And if they had, we didn't tell them, just call in and opt out. But we said in our plan that we expected that to happen. PARCC is very disruptive at the high school, because you have all the mixed grades. It's not like you just have the 8th grade like you do at Churchill, and pretty much the 9th grade. There's some mixing, but not a whole lot. But when you get to the high school, it's mixed all over. And then the state comes along and says, well, if a student is in language arts, AP, they don't have to take it. And when you get to the high school, if they've already taken Algebra 2, which virtually every 11th grader has, they can't take it. And no 12th graders can take the test. So you get, so you can imagine what scheduling, what that does to it. So getting it down to really the students that had not met the graduation requirements, and the state has come back and said it's up to the district. You have to take it, but it's really up to the district. So that went very well. I think parents appreciated getting the information. We gave them 5 years' worth of test data and whether they had met on each one. And we had some students that met on everything, some that just, they met one test here and one test there. So it went much smoother at the high school this year, and we picked up those that needed to take PARCC for
This is just-
graduation.
Yeah,
took
this
it.
is just crazy. You look ahead at the other slides for the secondary level assessments, particularly at the high school, the PSAT and the SAT.
Ah, wait.
It's a different school.
Wait.
Right,
This is a
right.
whole different school.
Well, when you
Wait.
get, this
This
is
is
the
our
fr-
school.
You're
This is
reading
our
ahead.
school.
this is the frustration that we have,
That's
is
our
that
school.
when you
Okay,
have-
and that's what I'm going to really talk
When you-
about. And then we
Dr.
have our
Ogden.
science assessments.
Just one comment. When you give parents the opportunity to opt out, and before Dr. Ogden started preparing all the backup data, parents are going to take that option, and students will convince their parents they don't want to take the assessment. Yet the state is mandating this Board of Education administer that statewide standardized assessment. This is the first time in my educational career where we've had a mandated assessment where you have the ability to opt out from it.
Yeah, and it was fine. As far as we're concerned, it's a graduation requirement. And if they met it,
I know. but-
fine. They
We've
better-
shaken our head harder than you just did.
Right. And now we move into the PSAT, and you look at our district mean for the 11th grade and the state mean of 998. I mean, we're 117 points higher than the state.
Probably
This
the
is-
national too, right?
Yes. And then PSAT doesn't give us the national one. And the SAT, I mean, we're really doing well. Yeah. 175 or so points above the state average. And, you know, our students don't have any trouble with the SAT.
And are you seeing the percentage of test participation fall for the SAT as the ACT increases?
The ACT
Yeah.
is increasing.
Right, so
And that's my next slide, as a matter of fact.
that 83% just seemed lower than other years.
Right, and there are 42% that took the ACT.
Yeah.
Now, there's a huge overlap in students that took both.
Right. But there are students who are just taking the ACT.
There are some,
and
yes,
not the
and that's
SAT.
increasing each year as more colleges are going toward the
ACT.
ACT, because it gives them more information.
Right.
Because if you notice, SAT gives you a math and it gives you a language arts, but the ACT gives you English, it gives you algebra specifically, it gives you social studies, and it gives you science. So those are good indicators of how
Yeah.
well students do in those subjects, and they go to college, they take more than just math and language arts. And again, it doesn't look like as much because the ceiling on the ACT, I don't know exactly what it is, maybe it's I don't know, 28 or something, but you're dealing with numbers like 26 and 23
Yeah.
as opposed to 1,003.
Right.
And if you noticed, on the SAT, we didn't give like 3 years, because last year, for the first time, again, we went back to the SAT is based on 1,600 points.
Right.
Remember, writing was a separate one, so it was
Used to be 24.
24. So
Right.
we're back to 1,600. It's a totally new test. The PSAT is a totally new test.
Right.
Graduation requirements. And this is interesting because this is sort of laying all these different tests next to each other. And the good news is that last year, the class of 2017, every student met the graduation requirement, and we had no students that were required to do the portfolio assessment. That was probably, we may have been the district in the state, or certainly a very small group. But if you notice, there's a lot of consistency, and PARCC is lower, even in language arts. But between the SAT, the ACT, and this is in terms of percentage of students that meet the standard for college preparation on those tests. So right across, you look at PSAT, SAT, ACT, and even PARCC isn't, that much lower. But our students meet the graduation requirement, most of them not through PARCC. Most of them, it's through the PSAT, which all 10th and 11th graders take in the district, and we have virtually nobody that opts out of that test. And this is the same chart now for math. And math, you can see, is all over the place, which has a lot to do probably with the test itself. You look at SAT, ACT, almost exactly level. Then you look at PARCC, Algebra 1, 51%, but geometry, 88%. And then Algebra 2 is 70%. So if they were doing so poorly in Algebra 1, how on the PARCC did all of a sudden they do much better? So the math is very uneven. But again, because of the combination, you only have to meet one of these
Right.
in order to meet the standard for graduation if you're in the class of 2017, 18, 19, or 20.
It's just interesting, again, that the inconsistencies and the consistencies at the secondary level are kind of mirroring the ones at the elementary level, in terms of the math, again, being all over the place.
Well, and
I know it's different
It's an
tests.
algebra, geometry, and,
Right, but still, it's, wow.
I mean, look at the geometry, 88%.
Yeah, but it's,
That's,
But aren't our kids who are taking Algebra 1, generally speaking, less prepared and have
no.
fewer mathematical skills than a student who's taking Algebra 2 in the same
Yeah, but-
year?
Well, that'll be my next slide. But basically,
Uh-oh.
I
Well,
mean,
you're all jumping
we
ahead.
keep looking ahead
it's a
now.
sequence. They're taking pre-algebra, in 7th grade. They move into Algebra 1. Now, when they take the ACT, granted that's later, but it's 2 years after they've finished Algebra 1, or 3 years. 81% are passing the Algebra 1 ACT. SAT math includes a lot of algebra, but there's a little teensy bit of geometry in there.
So the ACT is just for math is just based on Algebra 1?
Yes. So you have this strange combination. It hasn't meant much as far as graduation requirements, because our students, either they pass the SAT, the ACT, PARCC geometry, because for these grades, if you pass geometry, well, it doesn't make any difference about algebra. You pass Algebra 2, doesn't make any difference if you failed geometry and Algebra 1. You just have to hit on one of those. Now, that's been very good for us. Now, before I go to the next slide, I do not believe that this will stand, and there are already lawsuits. The law center has already filed them. However, these are the graduation requirements for the class of 2021, which were last year's 8th graders. Sounds like way out there, but these are real students. The state for this class has done away with all the alternatives. So we're looking at math here. You must take and pass Algebra 1. This is a course we give in 8th grade. And the state has pushed us to do that. And kids and other indicators are doing very well. That's the only test that counts for graduation. If you don't pass Algebra 1, you cannot retake the test unless you go to summer school, and then you can take, even if you've passed the course, which they question whether school districts should do that, you are able to retake the test. If you don't pass Algebra 1 in 8th grade or 7th grade, all 7th graders pass it and have, you then must take the geometry and Algebra 2. If you don't take those, you cannot take the portfolio assessment. So if you skip, let's say, geometry, and you failed Algebra 1, you have literally failed high school in 8th grade. Yeah, you really think this is going to be. But that's the way it is at the moment. And if you look at other indicators, Algebra 1, 8th grade, the next number are students that pass Algebra 1 with a C or better. Then you have the SAT, and you have the ACT that you saw before, and you saw the PSAT. So you can see, this PARCC Algebra 1 test. There should be a correlation among these indicators. It isn't. Then we get to language arts, and now the PARCC, you have to pass the language arts 10. However, if you fail the algebra, you have to, in order to take the 10, you have to take the 9. And let's say you fail the 10, and now you take PARCC 11, and you pass it in language arts. It doesn't count. That allows you then to take the portfolio assessment.
If you pass
The 11.
11,
And you didn't pass the 10.
It doesn't
You must
count.
take the 11, and whether you pass it or not, then you're eligible to take the portfolio.
And is this the State Board of Education that determines these rules?
Yes.
Or DOE?
Oh, it's a combination, but the state board has to approve.
DOE recommends and DOE approves. Or
So-
sorry,
The
state
other
board,
way
state,
around.
state board approves, the
State
DOE
board.
recommends.
So the
I'm sorry.
state board has the same role as this
Yeah.
Board of Education over the Department of Education.
Gotcha.
So,
I'd like to see this Board of Education over the Department of Education personally.
so at the moment, this is what it is. I mean, 94% of our students pass. We can always look at 8th grade and predict that typically how you do on 8th grade, you may do a little better on the 9th grade, the 10th grade, the 11th grade. And you have all these other options that are no longer options for this grade. So we had a very high participation in 8th grade because we were obligated to tell parents, you have to take the test. You haven't taken the test, you can't take the next. So I lay this out. It's this class, it's 4 years from now before it happens. I leave it to you in terms of whether you think that this is going to stand.
Dr. Ogden, this is like the 17th time I've listened to you do this assessment. I don't think I've ever spent the whole time scratching my head and
Well,
shaking my
I tell
head.
you, this, you need to know it's out there.
Yeah, wow.
Um,
So imagine, so you're hearing it from our expert. Imagine how confusing this would be for a parent to figure,
yeah.
which piece does my child need to pass? And then what's the next option if they don't pass that? So there's gonna be a lot of active
So what are we
conversations
doing? Yeah, what are we
with our
gonna do
guidance
about that?
department.
We
and-
sent the parents,
Right.
the 8th grade parents, everybody got different letters this year, depending on where they were.
Right.
But the 8th grade parents did get a copy of these graduation requirements for that class of 2021.
I think we should.
I don't think they were terribly, I didn't get a lot of calls.
Yeah, but I think we should
But they
reiterate
did-
it.
they
as-
did take the test.
Yeah, but reiterate it as many times as possible. Back to school night, even parent-student conferences, maybe have a table set up with some of our guidance counselors in Churchill to explain when parents kind of,
Yeah, it's almost something for this, probably the less you tell them.
I don't know, Doctor.
It's gotta be focused
I think Dr.
communication.
Valesky is right. I think-
Focused communication.
yeah.
Well, I'm a parent of an 8th grader, and I was not aware of this, and,
It was in the letter that went home.
okay, but
The picture of the state, we actually.
I hear you, but it does bear some more
Yeah.
explanation. I agree with
I
that.
suspect that by January, maybe of this year, or certainly by April of this year,
Mhm.
We'll see its difference.
This graduation
Okay.
requirement will definitely
Okay,
go away, or be modified and go back to what it was.
but let's take advantage of the times
Let's be
we have.
prepared, yeah.
Parents,
Yeah, let's be
parents
prepared.
that, when we do the incoming 8th grade parent night, incoming 9th grade
I
parent
hope by the
night.
time the incoming 8th grade, it will have been modified.
Evelyn, from your mouth to God's ears.
Mhm.
Well, we also have gubernatorial days coming up.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Barbara, thank you for providing us with that insight because you are an 8th grade parent.